You know, we see interviews everywhere, every single day. They're basically the engine of modern journalism, but we rarely stop to think about what they actually are. And for over 100 years, the interview has been at the center of this really fierce and pretty fascinating debate.
So, what's the deal? Is the interview this noble art form a genuine search for the truth, or is it a kind of assault? The answer, as you're about to see, is way more complicated than you might think. And this really gets to the heart of it. On one side, you have people who see it as this incredible source of truth, a high art even. But on the other side, its critics, and a lot of times the people being interviewed, they see it as this awful intrusion, a violation that takes something from them, almost like someone stealing a piece of their soul.
All right, so let's start with the case against the interview. And this view was shared by some of the biggest names in literature, which is pretty telling.
The Nobel Prize winner V.S. Naipaul really gets straight to the point here. He believed that interviews literally inflicts a wound, that people actually lose a part of who they are in that process. So for him, it's not just an annoyance, it's genuine harm. And this isn't some newfangled complaint either. Lewis Carroll, the guy who gave us Alice in Wonderland, he had what people called a just horror of the interviewer. He was apparently so terrified of being publicly picked apart that he just flat out refused to ever be interviewed, ever.
But Rudyard Kipling, wow. He took it to a whole other level. I mean, the force of his language here is just staggering. He didn't just dislike interviews. He called them immoral, a crime, and he directly compares them to a physical assault. That is an unbelievably strong condemnation.
And maybe the most vivid description of all comes from the novelist Saul Bellow. He gave us this unforgettable image, interviews as thumbprints on his windpipe. You can literally feel the suffocation in that metaphor. So for these incredible creative minds, the interview wasn't just a nuisance, it was a violent, invasive act.
But okay, that's not the whole story. Because despite all this visceral hatred for it, the interview is everywhere. It thrives. So let's flip the coin and look at the other side of the argument, where the interview is seen not as an assault, but as this absolutely essential, powerful tool.
And here's the kicker, the big twist. The very same Rudyard Kipling who called interviewing a crime had, just a few years earlier, assaulted Mark Twain with an interview of his own. And H.G. Wells, another critic, went and interviewed Joseph Stalin. So this reveals either this deep hypocrisy or maybe just a deep, unavoidable necessity. They hated being the subject, but they just couldn't resist being the one asking the question.
Writer Christopher Sylvester really captures the practical side of it. He says, look, despite all its flaws, the interview is just a supremely serviceable medium. You know what? It works. It's just a really effective way to get information from one person to millions of others.
And this really nails why it's so powerful today. As Dennis Bryan points out, think about it. Almost everything we feel we know about public figures, our most vivid impressions, comes to us through this one format. The interviewer has this incredible amount of power in shaping how we see the world.
So this tension between assault and necessity is just fascinating, right? To see how it all plays out in the real world. Let's zoom in on a case study, a really famous interview with the legendary Italian scholar and novelist Umberto Eco.
So first, who was this guy? Umberto Eco was a true genius, a polymath. For most of his life, he was a highly respected professor and academic writing about incredibly complex subjects. Then, in 1980, he publishes a novel, The Name of the Rose, and bam, he becomes this global intellectual superstar.
So an interviewer once asked Eco how he managed to be so ridiculously productive, and he didn't just give a simple answer. Instead, he posed this fantastic question, which set up this brilliant analogy about time and space.
And here's the punchline. If you take out all the empty space, the entire universe shrinks down to the size of your fist. What a powerful image. And that's the key to his whole secret. He wasn't making more time. He was using the time that was already there, hidden in plain sight.
Eco called this secret the philosophy of interstices, a pretty amazing concept that he shared with the world through, you guessed it, an interview. So what in the world are interstices? Well, they're the gaps. You know those moments you're waiting for a friend, standing in line at the coffee shop, or riding in an elevator? Most of us just see that as dead time, right? Time to scroll on our phones. Eco saw it as a massive opportunity.
And he gave the interviewer this perfect, real-time example. He basically said that in the time it took the interviewer to come up in the elevator from the first floor to the third, he could have already written a short article in that little empty space.
It's just an incredible way to completely reframe how we think about time.
Okay, so let's tie this all back to our main question. Eco's philosophy is amazing, no doubt, but the really important part is that it was the interview that allowed millions of people to even hear about it.
I love this quote. It tells you so much about how he saw himself. In his own mind, he was an academic first and foremost, but he understood that his novels and all the interviews about them were the bridge that connected his complex world to the rest of us.
And just look at the size of that bridge. His incredibly serious, dense academic novel sold somewhere between 10 and 15 million copies. I mean, just think about that for a second. A book about medieval history and metaphysics became a global bestseller. A scholarly article could never, ever do that. It was the popular novel, supercharged by interviews, that made it all possible.
And what's really cool is that Eco used the interview platform to gently critique the media itself. He pointed out that so many publishers and journalists just assume that the public wants simple, easy trash.
But his own success was the ultimate comeback. It proved that millions of people are actually hungry for complex, challenging ideas. They don't always want junk food. Sometimes they want a deep, philosophical meal. And the interview, in this case, helped reveal a truth not just about Umberto Eco, but about all of us.
So we're left with this final nagging question. The interview can feel like thumbprints on the windpipe, like a total assault on a person's identity. And yet, it's the very same tool that brought us Umberto Eco's brilliant philosophy and proved that a mass audience is way smarter than it's often given credit for. So is it this flawed, even dangerous tool that we just can't live without? That right there is the paradox of the interview.